great. Thank you so much for joining today's Advanced Nuclear State Collaborative webinar on nuclear energy modeling tools for states. I am going to pass things over to today's moderator, Kenya Stump, who is with the Kentucky Office of Energy Policy and an ANSC member. Thank you, Kenya.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. And thanks to all those who have cut out some time to hang with us today and talk about modeling and site screening and the tools that we have available. As mentioned, I'm Kenya Stump. I'm an ANSC member. I'm executive director here at Kentucky's Office of Energy Policy. Just like to remind everyone about the ANSC. It was formed in 2023 between NASIO and NARUC with the support of the U.S. Department of Energy. And it really is there to allow us to collectively work together and understand some of the unique regulatory and policy considerations around the deployment of new advanced nuclear generation. I think for me, it's really been a great opportunity for peer sharing, mentoring, just having a network of colleagues to share and learn from. We are a multi-year cooperative agreement between DOE, Office of Nuclear Energy, and NARUC. It was an initiative out of the Nuclear Energy Partnership. Membership is open to state energy offices as well as public utility commissions. So welcome to all who's joining us today. I do have some quick housekeeping notes just to remind everyone. The webinar is recorded and will be posted on NARUC's YouTube channel. We will distribute the slides to registered attendees after the webinar. Please use the Q&A box in the Zoom toolbar, and we will get to your questions as they come in, and hopefully we'll have time to address all of those. If we do not, we'll make sure we address those questions in a follow-up to all the registered attendees after the webinar today. But as you all know, I'm so excited to work with the speakers today. If you're working in nuclear, the hottest topic is site screening, site feasibility, site assessments. It seems like that's where we're all at right now, especially if you're a cold nuclear state or a new nuclear state. Getting just some better understanding about siting criteria, site selection, working with utilities on siting. So I'm very excited today that we have Randy Bells, Senior Reactor Licensing and Safety Analyst with Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Randy's going to talk about OR-SAGE, the siting analysis for power generation expansion model. I'm a big fan of OR-SAGE. It was in the Coal to Nuclear report. It helped develop a really cool map to kind of show where siting could occur. But it's not the only tool available. We have Gabrielle, let's see, Hoelzle. I got that right. Gabrielle Hoelzle, Senior Project Manager for the Fastest Path to Zero initiative at the University of Michigan. Gabrielle's here is going to share the siting tool for advanced nuclear development. Gabrielle, I'm a user of Stand. I go in there and use it, and I've got my login, and it's a great tool as well. And I'm glad that we have two perspectives on how we approach getting more awareness around siting criteria, site selection. It's just a matter of time before it comes up in your state if it's not already there, and we're going to need tools in the toolbox and educate those in our state about siting, site selections. So with that, I'm going to stop talking because like Randy, I could talk the whole webinar and they've got me on a script, but Randy's going to kick us off on OR-SAGE, and with that, I'll mute and turn it over to Randy.
Looks like we're going Stand. Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Kenya. As Kenya noted, my name is Randy Bells. I do provide safety and licensing analysis for the OR-SAGE tool output. Dr. Femi Tamu is the principal investigator for OR-SAGE. His name's also listed here on the slide. And Kenya read out our acronym, but as you can see from the acronym, ORSAGE is basically just a power generation siting analysis tool. It's not strictly nuclear, it doesn't have to strictly be nuclear, but the predominant use is for nuclear siting. Next slide, please. So with this slide, I would just like to acknowledge some of the current contributors and some of the funding sources since the inception of the ORSAGE tool back in 2008, actually. And there's actually been a lot more people than are listed here that have worked on it over the years. But quite an extensive funding source that we've had there. Next slide, please. So as I noted, in late 2008, that's when we got our start. Staff at the lab, including FEMI and myself, began evaluating where nuclear power generation could be sited based on studies of electrical demand growth. And without reading all the bullets on the slide to you, to facilitate the visualization of complex sets of data, we began the development of a database centered on the use of Geographic Information System, or GIS data. And so we've been at this for quite some time. FEMI likes to say 2 decades. It's not quite 2 decades, but we're getting there. Next slide, please. So if you're not familiar with GIS technology, as the figure in the upper right shows, any plot of land can be described by any number of data sets. And so the key really is identifying what data is available to support an evaluation of electrical generation siting. And so the process for establishing parameter evaluation of reactor technologies is I'm going to outline on the next slide. So go ahead and advance. So ORSAGE focuses on the licensing requirements, and those requirements from the NRC are found in 10 CFR 100, and that's the regulation on reactor siting. And then that references 10 CFR 50.34, which is the regulation governing dose to the public. And so those regulations, they are the law, and they tell us what to look at, but not necessarily with numerical values or limits. And so the NRC regulatory guides and the Electric Power Research Institute, which is EPRI, often provide specific values and give you a path then to meet the regulations. And then so the key to ORSAGE and to any GIS technology then is to utilize the available data sources to flag those databases that are become insightful, in this case, to reactor siting. So next slide, please. So this slide is, in fact, the whole ORSAGE process. So if you had to put the whole model on one slide, this is it. So using the available guidance that I just talked about, there's potential bounding siting parameters are identified, and the supporting data is processed to represent data using a consistent coordinate system. And that's what's going on in steps 1 through 3 on this slide. And then individual parameter layers can be developed in areas that exceed a database query value, and that's what this is all about. You're creating a database, and then you can question the database about what you're interested in. So areas that exceed a database query value can be flagged. And in step 4 there, a single layer is portrayed for the database. And I'm showing you how we set up the layers, and then in a couple steps or a couple minutes here, I'll show you what the layers actually are. And then so all the layers are incorporated in the siting solution and can be stacked and evaluated and represented as a color-coded grid to provide a visual siting information. And that's what's going on in steps 5 and 6. There's lots of colors in that map in step 6 there, and I'll talk about that on a slide a little bit later. But the key here is the whole database is using more than 60 data sets to parse the contiguous United States into 100 meter by 100 meter cells. So each cell is about 2.5 acres, which provides a 700 million cell database to interrogate on siting. And 2.5 acres, and the way I visualize it in my mind, it's about 3 football fields laid side by side. So that's what we're parsing the US data into. And along the way, we've also created a separate database for Alaska and for Hawaii. So we've got all the states covered. Next slide, please. Okay, the algorithm or the tool uses several supporting algorithms. We use a support algorithm to track water availability using United States Geological Survey gauge locations. That's what's being shown on the left, and we can calculate then a water value for each cell in the database. We can forecast population growth or decline, and that's what's shown in the middle picture there. The red is growth around major cities, that's growth. And then if you can see the yellow polka dots, excuse me, those are the smaller areas where population decline is forecast. And then finally on the right there, we have an algorithm that can pull database cells together to support a given reactor technology footprint. Next slide. So now here are then the baseline set of parameters or flags that ORSAGE uses for reactor siting. And in a much longer presentation, we could go into what each includes, why they're important, and how they are calculated. I will stress here, though, that all the flags are weighted equally. All the flags that end up getting used in any particular evaluation are weighted equally. As needed, we can look at population density in the vicinity of each of the 700 million database cells. We can look at water-related parameters, including wetlands, the 100-year floodplain, and the availability of makeup cooling water if a technology needs makeup cooling water. We can look at geographic issues, including safe shutdown earthquake, identified faults, slope, and the landslide hazard. And finally, we can include land that's been set aside for the public good, and it's labeled on this list as protected land, and land that includes hazardous operations such as commercial airports, military bases, oil rigs, that kind of thing. User desired layers can, well, let me put it this way, undesired layers can be pulled, and I kind of alluded to that with the water makeup cooling water layer if you use a technology that doesn't need makeup cooling water. And also client-specific layers can be added. We've done that before as well. And then not listed on this chart are data layers that we can provide as an overlay, such as the grid, the transportation system, and pipeline infrastructure. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, but I just wanted to show you the list that we've used that's been vetted by EPRI folks. Next slide, please. So now back to the key result, the most important factor that you get out of this is the visualization. And so this is a national visualization for a small reactor database query. The green indicates areas that are favorable to siting, and the map, as you can see, as you might surmise, shows why the current technology reactors are located where they are, predominantly in the southeast, or at least in the east, let's put it that way. So that the areas are not colored green, as shown to the right, the tool can look down through each layer and it can query each cell for what was tripped at that location. So you can find out why a result is not green, and you can figure out what you might be able to do to mitigate that. So just because something's not green doesn't mean it's not usable. And so then the yellow, orange, and blue colors then, as the legend indicates, show that one or more cells have been tripped. So, and all that's nice on a national basis, but yeah, you can also use this then in a more valuable way, I think, is to start zooming in on sites. So next slide, please. So, as I said, we can zoom in on individual locations, and we have used ORSAGE to validate the current reactor sites. In this case is Watts Bar. So this slide shows the Watts bar with the favorable siting area shown in green, and then the other color results, the yellow, the orange, and the blue, have been removed, and then it's easy to see what might have been flagged at the site, such as the riverbank, and perhaps the floodplain, and there might be some other parameters there too. But you can see basically the reactor site is amenable, as we would hope it would be, and you're not trying to site in the middle of the river as that would show there. Next slide. And so this is the most common use of ORSAGE nowadays, is not to look at a national scale or even a regional scale, but as folks are coming to us with individual sites. So typically we put a bullseye over the site with a half-mile circle and a 1-mile circle traced out over the site. This gives you approximately a 500-acre look around the site center and a 2,000-acre look around the site center for the two circles. So shown here is a very rural coal plant site. It appears to be very amenable to reactor siting, given all the green that's around in the bullseye area. The areas in yellow are the cooling lake and other on-site ponds. Coal plants are very wet places, so that's what this is showing in the yellow. But there's lots of green in that 2,000-acre circle for this particular example. So this site would appear to be very amenable for consideration of reactor siting. Can't go any further than that, but it looks amenable. Next slide. So this slide shows just the opposite. So I'd say here, however, this slide shows that the results can become quite complicated to interpret. This is the Bull Run steam plant that just recently closed near Oak Ridge National Lab, here where I am. Now, as complicated as that looks, there are actually favorable areas here, and there is a fusion technology entity that is looking to use this site for experiments. So I find that interesting as well. But I just wanted to show this site because not all the sites are simple, but just because there's lots of color on the slide does not mean that it doesn't have potential, put it that way. Next slide, please. I think I'm doing okay on time. So this slide is probably a little bit of an eyesore here. And I don't really mean to have anybody read each individual line on the slide, but using publicly available data, we've begun to try to adapt reactor technologies that are under development, that you commonly hear about, to a specific modeling within ORSAGE, depending on customer interest. So we've adapted more than this slide actually shows, but this is enough of an eyesore just to put these up here. And I just want to add that when we use the tool and we work with a customer, we absolutely will not tell the customer what technology to select. It's not the role of a national lab to be doing that. But we do want to be ready to support specific analysis requests. So if a customer says, I want to use, technology X, we want to be able to model that very specifically for them. And so that's the direction we're trying to go here with ORSAGE, and that's all I'm trying to get at on this slide. There are subtle differences between technologies, and we can, in certain cases, we can get that into the model. And again, this is all based on publicly available data. So, next slide. So then, I guess the key question at this point is, what are the benefits that you as an individual or an entity can get from ORSAGE, and then how do you access the tool? So you can see here, we've done a lot of different sorts of studies. We've done studies for utilities. TVA has been a big user of ORSAGE. There have been a number of other utilities as well. We worked with an investment firm. They're looking to invest in property to then develop for generation. Very recently, we've started looking at data center siting and using reactor technologies to provide reliable power to data centers. In 2022, we did a major nationwide study of coal plants. this is where GAIN put the spotlight on the Osage tool, really the results of this coal to nuclear study that we did back in 2022. Last summer, the White House and the DOE Loan Program Office wanted us to look at what was the potential for generation expansion at all the existing nuclear plants in the country. So we did a study for them there. Looking at different ways to go, we've looked at waste transport and storage optimization. So that's not necessarily reactor siting, but we've used the same GIS process to look at other parts of the fuel cycle. Let's put it that way. So now, as for access to the tool, it really comes down to two things. Kenya, am I getting short on time?
No, you're good, Randy. I just have a question that I'm teeing up when you're done.
Oh, okay. I just saw you pop in. Want to make sure I'm
Yeah,
not running over.
no, you're good, Randy. Yeah.
So access to the tool, and it really is, there's two bullets there, but it really comes down to direct funding of the ORNL staff. I mean, you either fund us directly on your nickel, or the more optimal way to gain access to the ORNL staff at no cost to you really is to use DOE GAIN funds. And Andy Worrell, who I've listed on the last slide as a contact, and Christine King and others could give you information on how to use DOE GAIN funds to use the tool. But we do not have a web presence where a user can go and interact with the web and interact with the tool.
Hey,
Next
Randy.
slide.
Yeah, Randy, just real quick. There are state energy offices on here. We have funding that's pretty flexible. This may get into your contracting. Does ORNL kind of have a standard contract we could use with ORSage? Like if a state energy office wanted to fund use of the tool, just trying to figure out some logistics, because I think that could be of interest to some states, or even to NASIO. If we have a pool of states with funding, we may want to see a pathway to utilize ORSage for a subset of states. Does that make sense, Randy?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, we have an office that is set up for work for others. I'm not sure if that's the ongoing name nowadays, but yeah, there are standard contracts set up that can be put in place. I will caution, it's not an immediate process. It takes time to set up, but
well, as with anything, when we say contracting, it's not immediate, but at least that may be a follow-up. We may follow up with you on kind of who the contracting officer is.
And I also know if Christine King has worked with states, and when they have a sites of interest, she just comes to us directly and says, would we run an analysis for 2 or 3 whatever sites?
And I think you did one of our sites, so this is a testimonial. We did work with GAIN, and we had a site, an existing coal site.
So GAIN has kept money at ORNL, and then Christine says just draw from that fund and just go ahead and run these 2-3 sites, and we've done that as well. So anyway, I hate to put words in their mouth because I don't control that funding, but
yeah. Next slide for Randy. Sorry to derail the webinar, but I like to keep it very conversational. So.
Oh no, that's fine. So as I noted, ORSage is not directly available via a web interface. We have a number of reasons why we don't do that. Number one is there's a considerable amount of data to keep up to date. We're not funded to keep it up to date on a routine basis. So it's typically done on a project to project basis and not on a day-to-day basis. So that's the number one reason we don't keep a public-facing database out there. Also, since I showed you how complicated the results can be, and I did that on purpose, we feel like you get a better interpretation of the data with lab support. As I noted, Femi and I have been doing this for 17 years. The results can be complex, and we feel like clients and customers are less likely to have false positives or false negatives if they can have help looking at what the data is telling them. So those are the two big reasons. We also feel like it's better with more computing power. And then finally, this is more of a selfish reason on our part, but there's no need for us to worry about site registration or layered access security, cybersecurity issues. Those things are all very important to the lab. And so if we can get out of having to do that, like I said, that's kind of a selfish reason right there. Next slide. And so I appreciate having the opportunity to present. I know this was a very, very quick overview. Femi and I have about a 45-minute presentation that we can give all by ourselves and go deeper into what the layers are and how they're calculated. And we would be happy to give that presentation to anybody who has further interest in ORSAGE and wants to learn a little bit more. Our contact information is shown there. As I said, Femi Omitamu is the principal investigator. And then I also listed Andy Worrell's contact information there. Andy wears a lot of hats at Oak Ridge National Lab, but one of them is he's the deputy director of GAIN, and he can explain how to get GAIN funding to do some things as well, better than I can. So thank you again. And I'll stop there and let Gabrielle talk about STAND.
Yeah, now we're going to move into Gabrielle while we're getting Gabrielle's slides up. Unlike ORSage, STAND is a nice web interface. It's good to get in there and play around. Although I will warn everyone, if you get into STAND, you might come out of it about 4 hours later and have a lot of questions. So, but it's great. It's great for getting in there and really like doing some interactive screening work. So Gabrielle, it's all yours and STAND.
Okay. Hello all, and thank you so much. Just as a heads up before I get started, I am on vacation right now, so I apologize if the sound is not great, but I really wanted to make the most of this opportunity to present to you all. So STAND is the siting tool for advanced nuclear development. It was funded by NRIC, the National Reactor Innovation Center out of Idaho National Lab. And we have worked quite extensively with Randy and Femi at Oak Ridge National Lab over the years, and some of the data that we use in STAND is also in ORSAGE. So there is some crossover in the data availability, primarily in the regulatory data, such as like the slope population restrictions, earthquake, seismic risk, that sort of thing, which we can get into a little bit more later. Next slide, please. So what is STAND? STAND is a tool to help you identify and compare possible siting locations across the US. It is better in the continental US. We do have data for Alaska and Hawaii, but it is more limited. That's just based on the underlying data availability. It's a tool to help answer the question of where and why there. Go ahead and next slide. So NASEO and NAREC asked us to talk a little bit about our users on our tool. So STAND is a publicly available application. It is accessible at fptz.org or through the NRIC website, and we'll have a QR code to that at the end of the presentation. But we have about 800 users of STAND since its launch about 2 years ago. You can see we have quite a few from government, including many from government and state government offices. Also in the manufacturing, NGO, political, press, public research, and university and utility space. Go ahead and next slide. Here are some of the organizations that we've worked with that have used the STAND tool. Next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit more deep here. So there are 3 factors that we consider when we're looking at STAND: socioeconomic factors, proximity factors, and safety factors. So socioeconomic factors could be like local energy policy, community acceptance of nuclear, labor rates, Proximity could include distance to exclusionary zone criteria or other infrastructure that you may want to access, roads, waterways, rail lines, transmission. And then safety includes the environmental and geological safety factors, safety risk and mitigation approaches. So here you have things such as fire risk and slope and floodplain. Go ahead and next slide. So the way that this is the stand landing page here. So if you go to our tool, which I really hope that you do, and you log in, you'll see these three sorts of sections here. We have site discovery, site exploration, and site comparison. So you can approach this in a linear fashion. If you start at site discovery, which would be like the broadest level of analysis, and that's really looking at county and state factors. To help narrow it down, we create a county heat map across the US based on the user's priorities. There's site exploration, which is more similar to what you saw in Randy's ORSA GIS portion. It is a GIS component where you can view data on a map and drop pins. And then we have site comparison. So this would be great if you are a state energy office that has a few sites you are interested in and would like to run a comparative analysis on which of those sites would be best, might be best for siting nuclear technology. Go ahead and next slide. So these next three slides, we're not expecting you to read all of these either. We have more than 68 different layers of data in Stand. So this is just kind of the rundown of what we have. So a lot of infrastructure data. You can see some labor data, safety data, all hazardous facilities. Hazardous facilities are always very interesting depending on what your use case is. Some of them may not actually be hazardous for your use case, and some of them may. So you can choose which to include and which not to include in the analysis. Next slide, please. We also recently have added a few new layers that includes this hydrogen demand, which could be of interest. We also added the fire risk recently, and we're updating our floodplain data to be 500-year floodplain. So that is not shown here in these data sets, but it is available in the tool. Go ahead and next slide. And next slide. Actually, could you go back one slide? So here I wanted to describe this. It's very hard to show a dynamic web application through a series of slides and get a sense of it. But all of our data is variable by the user, and often some of the indicators are themselves variable. So here, if you're looking at safe shutdown earthquake, which represents the seismic risk, you can look at through a range of values from 0.3 G to 15 G in Alaska, depending on what reactor size and type you're trying to site. Same thing with stream flow. Some of them will need more water than others. So we have a variability there that the user can determine between 15 kgpm and 84 kgpm. Next slide, please. So the first section, if you're going in through discovery, is a set. I think there's about 19 different questions that you're asked. So for each of these questions, you decide how important that is to you, from not at all important to not important to high. The little I box after the text next to the map icon, if you open that, it will give you a description of the underlying data, why it is relevant to citing, the date of last update, and the underlying data source. Our data is updated regularly depending on the update schedule of the underlying data source. So some of those might be weekly, some are monthly, some are yearly, but whenever we run that data automation script, it also updates this information box with the date of the last update. Once the user has gone through these 18 questions, next slide, it creates this heat map. So it ranks each county based on how well that county aligned with the user priorities. One other thing that I wanted to discuss in the last form is we also have things like, is it home to an existing coal facility? Has that coal facility closed? What time period are you looking for that coal facility to close? So the results that you get here are going to vary based on user-defined inputs. You can save counties by just clicking on them. You can on the right hand and adding them to the list at the bottom. You can also click on them and get a report card, which shows you for each county that you click on what your criteria was and how well it matched with that criteria and how that score was calculated. You can also go back and modify those criteria and play around with the mapping that comes out a little bit at the end. Okay, next slide. So now we're in site exploration. So this is kind of a complicated slide. There's a lot going on. WebGIS does tend to be a little bit complicated to use, and I think that's what is so great with working with Randy and Femi at Oak Ridge is they do provide that level of expertise. We also are available for support and questions if needed, and you can contact us through our application. There's a contact us button. On the left-hand side, we have all of the layers that you can view. So right now, you can click those on, and then it will show all of the different parameters. And if you click on the map, say you clicked on a point near Baton Rouge, the bottom section below the map, those little boxes with green or with blue tops show you what data would be at your click. So at that spot of click, for example, the intersection with some of the safety factors are it is in a population zone, there is landslide hazard, and there is not a floodplain there. On the right hand, you can also identify any electricity energy generators at that site, and also brownfields. So those are the layers that we selected. But we have many, many layers to look in here. Those safety, proximity, and socioeconomic factors. Next slide, please. Here's an example of those information boxes that I pointed out earlier. So here we're looking at the IRA information. So the Inflation Reduction Act, here's why it matters and it might be relevant to citing. Here's the definition and the source. So this is for every single layer across the entire tool, whether you're in site discovery, exploration, or comparison. Next slide, please. Here's another example of this WebGIS interface. Here we are looking at electric substations, transmission lines, brownfield data, as well as stream flow, so stream availability. You can, at the click, you would get those boxes at the bottom, and then the symbology is in the left-hand side when viewing that layer. Go ahead and next slide. When you're in site exploration, you can also drop points for site comparison. You can do that either through the WebGIS interface on the application, or you are able to upload a CSV with XY coordinates. Once you have your site anywhere from 2 to 20 of interest, you can go through the compare sites process. Next slide, please. A little bit similar to what you saw earlier in site discovery, the users are presented with priority to set a relevance and significance of each setting. So the idea is the relevance is how important a factor is, irregardless of how those sites would score across that factor. And the significance explains, or the significance should reflect how important that variations across your chosen sites are. So right now, the first step is figuring out this site relevance. Again, you use the slider to determine the relevance. The information box will also give you that help and support to identify, is this something that should matter to me for my use case? Many of them are variable, as discussed earlier. So with the safe shutdown earthquake or the seismic risk, you can choose, depending on what sort of reactor you're trying to cite, what the threshold you are willing to accept is. Okay, next slide. Here's an example. So after you've submitted that, you'll then go on to the significance setting. Here we're looking at some of the socioeconomic significance setting. You can see it provides across your sites. So this data is pulled in real time based on the sites you select, your best, worst, site average, national average, and the absolute value between best minus worst. So this will help you guide how significant this factor is. So something can be very relevant. For example, population constraints might be very important to you. That would be very relevant when citing a reactor, but maybe all of your sites are in areas that are not, where no flag is raised for population. So it would be relevant, but not significant, for example. Okay, next slide. You continue to go through this process, and those slides that I showed you with the parameters are not at all complete. There are many to choose from. And then we get the results across your site. So we have this map in the center pane that just reminds you of where your sites were. On the left-hand side, you can dig into the results of the individual sites. Next slide, please. It ranks all of your sites across the three values, safety, or the three different categories: safety, proximity, and socioeconomic. Next slide, please. And then we give individual results for each site. So you can kind of go through and get more detailed information. So here we're looking at the socioeconomic factors. There are no nuclear restrictions, what the energy price is from the worst to your best site, and where it falls along those parameters. Next slide, please. Here are those flagged areas. So the site we're looking at here is in a flagged area for landside hazard and slope, but not open water and wetlands. And for hazardous facilities, it's showing that there's one natural gas compressor station. Next slide. Continued results here. Next slide. Thank you very much. Here's the URL for accessing the tool. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Gabrielle. We've got a few questions for Randy and Gabrielle, and I've got some myself. So on the Q&A, Randy, maybe you can speak to that. I know we had a question about wetlands and if you can like mitigate a factor, if you can do things to like mitigate a factor that shows up. I know we had some sites, Randy, on ours where it had maybe a factor, but yet, there could be mitigation measures you could take to improve the site favorably. Do you want to talk about how that might apply to wetlands? The question we had was about wetlands.
Yeah, all of our factors that we have in ORSAGE, we consider to be flags. So we don't consider anything to negate the availability of that site. It just indicates you might have to take a mitigating factor. Maybe something like slope, it might mean you have to clear a little more land to make it, level or buildable. Now, to the question of wetlands, that gets a little stickier because there are a lot of rules about, filling in wetlands and using wetlands to build anything of that nature. So, and I'm not really qualified to answer the ins and outs of using wetlands. We tend to flag it and then tend to avoid it. So. I can add on. I know people are looking at a floating kind of a reactor, and you could consider a technology of that nature. But
I think we have had some floating ones in the Navy, right, Randy?
Yeah.
That was from Surya. She was referring to EPRI states wetlands can be considered with some workarounds. So that may be a follow-up with Syria. Catherine Manuel says, do users use both OR Sage and Stand together? How could these tools work to complement each other? And either of you can take that, maybe Gabrielle, how could they work together?
I think they can be complementary. I think Stand is great in its public availability and kind of the learn through doing, but it does not provide you with the hands-on experience that you would get working with OR Sage tools. So I think that they're both useful. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Randy?
Yeah, and one of the key differences, and I tried to stress that when I gave my presentation, is we don't provide any weighting at all. So whatever layers you use, they're all weighted equally, and that's the picture that you get. Whereas in the Stand tool, it does give you the opportunity to weight things differently. That could be overwhelming to a user, but they do work. They do complement each other in that regard.
Yeah, what I like, I want to jump in because I like to jump in too because I'm familiar with both. I think from Stan's the perspective of getting into Stan, I think the socioeconomic factors come into play. Energy price. Now that you've got hydrogen, you may end up adding a layer. Gabrielle, I'm just saying, maybe like in proximity to large industrials, that are there. So I think that's where Stan kind of differentiates a little bit from OR Sage. In my opinion, Randy, yours is like a true sighting, non-weighted, tool. Not that Stan isn't, but there's a lot of factors you may consider outside of just the the characteristics in the site. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm just rambling, but that's how I see them. But I would use them both. I would use them both for sure. Let's see. Stephanie asks, this is for Gabrielle. How do you gather and maintain data on the public sentiment on nuclear? That's been on my mind too, Gabrielle.
Yeah, so the public sentiment on nuclear, that data, so as I said, we update the data in our application as the underlying data source updates. So we did that initial analysis with University of Oklahoma Center for Risk and Resilience, and it is like 3 years old at this time, and we're currently trying to get additional funding to rerun that analysis and also change some of the way the survey questions were asked that are specific to using the terminology of advanced nuclear technology and small modular reactors, because we suspect that might also play into the results that we get at the end. But as of now, there's no hard date on update available. But that is also the currency of the data is listed in the tool as well. So it's not hidden. Yeah.
We've got a question, and this really gets into a tool that I use that we're not presenting on today, but I think it's another tool in the toolbox. So we have a question about kind of customizing a tool for site suitability, how you add specific limits and maybe specific data sets. I will say this is to, I'm going to mess the name up, Yannicka, I think Rothy. I have used the tool from Argonne, actually. I think it's the Geospatial Energy Mapper. And you can customize your layers, you can add, it really is a GIS site suitability where you customize and make your own site suitability model. Do I think it's accurate in respect to nuclear? No. Do I think Argonne needs to do some more work on it? Yes. But I think conceptually, it's another tool in the toolbox. Like I've used the Geospatial Energy Mapper before, and I think I would put that as another tool in the toolbox. It's completely interactive, but they have standard models, but you can also customize your models. And I don't know if you can do that in Stan, Gabrielle, if you can add more your own layers.
So currently you cannot add your own layers, but we do have a very flexible model as the user gets to decide what to include and what not to include and how to weight those parameters, right? So really it is kind of many models in one. It's a choose your own adventure. So it can be used to cite energy other than nuclear, where the parameters that would be required for nuclear often, some of them align with other large scale infrastructure citing. The GEM is a great tool too. I've used it as well.
Yeah. And in fact, if you're a state who has GIS, good GIS support, we've done Esri, the GIS. They've got a site suitability modeling suite that you can really customize. However, I wouldn't do that unless you've really run out of options with the tools that we're presenting today. But GEM's another great tool with Argonne. This is a question I have, and then we'll go back to some more questions. This is for Randy and Gabrielle. What changes are you seeing? I know here in Kentucky, the nuclear company has been really looking at siting large reactors like Vogtle. You all have mentioned kind of SMRs and some of the advanced nuclears and even micro reactors. What are kind of the things you're seeing, citing, trends, users, large reactors, small reactors, how you kind of accommodate that? Any comments on that would be appreciated.
Well, yeah, obviously we follow, I mean, what you're seeing in the nuclear industry at large, and what we're seeing our customers nowadays is they do want a reference to the large reactors, just kind of for reference, but then they're very interested in how do you site the small and advanced reactors. And they're coming to us with their list of sites in hand, and they're saying, please evaluate these 30 or 40 sites on that basis. So.
I think there's also been new interest in behind the meter data centers for data centers. So we're getting a lot of interest along that avenue, which is new. Nobody was talking so much about behind the meter just a few years ago.
Well, and to that point, we're seeing some interest on our kind of steam heat users, right? So how do you get your hands around, if you've got, we've got aluminum smelters, we've got, stainless steel, those, we've got high industrials outside of data centers that really, need a co-product of nuclear. And then I think that's something we're going to have to get our hands around as well in siting.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing as well. And as you see these smaller and smaller technologies where the source term is contained at the site boundary, that means they can be sited closer to these end users. So that's what we're seeing a lot of.
The last question I think we came into the Q&A is, what's the major limitation in your tool? What's the limit? Kind of if someone were to ask, what's the limitation of OR Sage or Stand?
Well, as I showed on our last slide, we do not have a web interface. You have to hire us, and I think there's a lot of valid reasons for it. I'm not trying to just make money, but that's how we think we keep the tool valid. But that is a limitation. It is, you have to jump through that hoop. So.
What about you, Gabrielle?
Gosh, it's a really good question. Nobody's ever actually asked me that before. So excellent question. It's always a struggle to properly represent reality in a mathematical model of any type. We're constantly reevaluating it. We're constantly thinking, what new layers can we have? What other things do our users need? So I think it can always be more comprehensive. The challenge is balancing comprehensiveness with like usability for the user too.
Right.
So I don't know, it's never perfect. There's always limitations. There's things that some people would like, that we would like. There's some things we would love to add and haven't had the timing or funding yet.
Yeah. I also think, Gabrielle, this is a good point with Randy and you, and then we're going to go to NARUC staff for some closeout and reminders. It's been a great conversation. I think for me, the importance is there's a differentiation between screening a site, in-depth site feasibility, and then really then starting your on-site, like due diligence work, like geotechnical work and everything that you're going to need for a permit. So just know that, you can screen a site, but there is another layer of detail. I think these tools get you started in that conversation. And then EPRI's got a great technology selection guide, if I'm right, I think, where you then can look at site and see what types of technology might work on that site. So anyway, those are my last thoughts, but I really enjoyed it. I love nerding out on a Friday on OR Sage and Stand. And again, I'll make sure Kelsey and Kira make sure we send out information on the gem so you can play with the gem too. It's a great tool. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Kira for NARUC closeout and reminders. Thanks, Gabrielle and Randy, and it was good seeing you all. Kira, your sound is, maybe it's just me. Am I not hearing Kira?
Is this any better?
Oh, you're better. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll start that over. Just wanted to share a couple of announcements. One is that NARUC is soliciting submissions for our Summer Policy Summit. If you have an idea for a session for one of our committees, you can go to the NARUC homepage, naruc.org, and submit those by April 9th. And a reminder for NARUC and NASGO members in particular, you can register for our site visit to Charlotte, North Carolina. We actually were able to extend our room block to next Friday, March 28th, so you have a little bit more time to decide if you'd like to attend that. But there is information for that on our website. We have a registration page open on the NARUC website, so would ask whether you're a NARUC or NASGO member. Please do complete that form, and we can send you information on security and travel reimbursement if that is desired. So again, please reach out to me with any questions. Looking forward to a great couple of days in Charlotte next month. That site visit is the 14th through 16th of April. And I think that's it for me, unless there are any questions. Oh, thank you, Kelsey, for putting the site visit registration link into the chat. All right, well, with that, I will just say thanks again to Kenya. Thanks very much to Randy and Gabrielle, especially for joining us on vacation. Really appreciate it. And happy March Madness to everyone.